There we go. All right. So we're going to start with just a little overview as to who Future Frontline are, why you guys are here this evening. If it'll let me change my slide. There we go. So as you all know, the NHS is about more than just doctors and nurses. There's allied health professionals like physios, who you guys are here to hear chat about tonight. And so Future Frontline are really passionate about raising awareness about all the other healthcare career roles, as there's over 350 different roles within the NHS that you could go down the route of. And we believe that there should be collaborative practice at the centre of everything we do, and that's fundamentally what's going to give our patients the best care, which is obviously the main thing that we want as healthcare professionals. But working collaboratively as a multidisciplinary team just means that we can all work better together, and as I said, to achieve that better patient care. We also think that socioeconomic status shouldn't be a barrier to pursuing any sort of career in healthcare, which is why Future Frontline is and always will be free for everybody to access these webinars. And we've also got our MDT webinars as well. There's one this weekend which is all about hip fractures. So feel free to come along to that, as well as obviously the physio one this evening. So to get started this evening, we thought we'd do something slightly different. So we want a bit of audience participation. So if I could ask you all to scan the QR code, if you've got a smartphone, to hand on the screen, and it'll take you to a site called Padlet, which basically, I was just explaining to the others, is, if you haven't used it before, it's a online sticky note message board, whiteboard sort of thing, where you can write anonymous comments that that we can then all view and have a look at together. So I'll leave that up for a few more moments before I load the Padlet site myself, and we can go through it. But I just want you to post a couple of things about if you're a current healthcare student, how are you feeling about upcoming placements? Are you nervous, excited? Do you know what your placement is yet, or are you an aspiring student that hasn't yet got to that stage but is just curious as to what physio students get up to on placement? I'll then in a moment share another Padlet site, which is going to be a question and answer board that you can post questions to throughout the evening. And I've put the link to that one in the chat, but I'll reshare it in a second. But I'll just give people a few more moments to join the Padlet site before I share my screen and load that one up. Right. So this is what it looks like. So hopefully you can all see this either on your smartphone or on the screen that you're viewing this on. So not sure what to expect, nervous and excited, apprehensive, excited. So generally, yeah, nervous and excited is kind of the undertone, which is brilliant. See a few more people typing, so I'll just give that another moment, and I'll just put the link to the other one in the chat if you haven't already seen it. First year apprentice going into critical care and surgery, feeling nervous. Don't know enough, excited to learn new skills. Brilliant. Okay. So that's really useful for us just to see how people are feeling at the moment, and hopefully we can try and ease some of those nerves and share with you our top tips. So, as I said, we've got another question board up, so feel free to post any questions as we go through up on there, and we'll come back to that at the end of the webinar. So I'm just going to stop sharing and then we'll introduce ourselves. So hello, I probably should have started with that. Hello, I'm Laura, and I'm a newly registered Band 5 physio up in Oxford. I just finished my Masters at the University of Southampton this Christmas. Helena, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so my name's Helena. I was at university with Laura at Southampton. I did my master's down there as well. Finished in December, and now I am at the Royal Berkshire Hospital in Reading. I started my rotational band 5 job, and I'm currently in respiratory.
Thank you. Amalia, do you want to tell us about yourself?
Yeah, hello, I'm Amalia. So I'm first year master's student down in the Southwest. I'm about to also go on placement, so I haven't started. So this is going to be a bit of help for me too. But yeah, that's me.
Perfect, thank you. And Kay.
Hi, I'm Kay. I'm currently a first year BSc student at University of Winchester, and I'll be going on my first placement in June. So excited for that.
Okay. So as I said, I'm sure you're all here today because we're talking about physiotherapy placements. So as we've just said, myself and Helena have both finished our courses and we're now working as physiotherapists, and Kay and Amalia are both at the other end in their first year. So we've got a bit of a mixture this evening rather. So to start with, Helena and I are just going to give you a little bit of an overview of what our placements were, with a slight caveat that we were studying during COVID, so they were slightly different to hopefully what yours will be like going forwards. But yeah, so Helena, I don't know if you want to tell everybody what yours were.
So yeah, as Laura said, they were a little bit different because of COVID, but so we had 4 overall. Our first one got cancelled, but my first one was a community placement. So I was quite lucky because during COVID that meant I actually could see patients because we were still going out in the community to see patients in their own home. I went into that one a little bit apprehensive, but I actually really enjoyed it. I had a really lovely team. Also, it was summertime, it was so hot, so it was actually quite nice to have a bit of fresh air in between seeing patients. But yeah, it was really nice, really good to see actually patients in their own home. So yeah, I was started in community. I don't know how much detail you want, but that was my first one. Second one I had was MSK outpatients. So for me, a lot of that was virtual. There was a lot of telephone conversations that went on along there, and I really had to use my clinical reasoning if I was going to bring a patient into the clinic. And really justify why they needed to come in face to face, because it was really limited because of COVID. So it kind of elevated those skills a little bit in terms of my clinical reasoning and pulling out why they would come in. And then I had my next one, which was an FCP placement. So this was a new placement for the university. For those who don't know, FCP is First Contact Practitioner. There's a few other abbreviations, but basically it's based in GP practices, where physiotherapists are kind of on the more of the front line. And instead of going to see a GP, you would be directed to a physio instead if you came in with like an MSK problem. So it was a very similar placement in a way because it was MSK again. But it was a very fast-paced placement. You have very short appointment times. They're about 10 minutes long, which is the fastest assessment ever. And then some were a bit longer, and I did get some face-to-face in there as well, but I was at GP practices all over the local area. And yeah, so that one was new. There was lots that went into that placement, and yeah, I had to give a lot of feedback because I was the first student to do it from the university. And then my last one was in an acute setting. So I then was on a vascular surgery ward, and amputee outpatients. So it was a kind of combined placement. It was all in the hospital, in the general, but I was on a vascular ward, and then part of that, which feeds on very nicely because a lot of it is diabetic patients, a lot of it is amputations of various levels, which led into the outpatient department. So it was quite a nice mixture overall. But yeah, so that was me.
Brilliant. So my first placement was major trauma, so trauma and orthopedics, but instead of being on an elective ward, I was on the major trauma unit. So I was dealing with patients that had been injured in lots and lots of different ways, most commonly things like car accidents and falling off ladders and crush injuries, all sorts of polytrauma, so where people have broken multiple bones in their bodies, and then internal injuries and things as well. So I really enjoyed that first placement. Then My second placement was community early supported discharge for stroke, which is actually what my first rotation that I'm doing at the moment is in. So that's quite helpful. And ESD is basically where patients that have had a stroke that are either sort of mild to moderately impaired, so they're able to go home and be safe at home, but they still need ongoing rehab and support. So we go in for up to 6 weeks to provide therapy for them in their homes, but specific neuro stroke therapy. My third placement was MSK outpatients. So this one was impacted by COVID, so it wasn't a normal MSK outpatients type setting. I was very lucky that it was entirely face-to-face, but I was only seeing staff members or emergencies. So these were patients that had had surgery recently and then needed physio follow-up following their surgery. So I did less sort of diagnosis and seeing new patients, new referrals than perhaps I would have at any other time point. I also managed to see all the pregnant ladies that had pelvic girdle pain, as that's my personal interest. So I got to do a bit of women's health in there as well with that one. And then my last placement was a leadership and management thing. So it was a non-patient facing placement, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. But I was working within the Chartered Society of Physiotherapy, the CSP, and I worked on a project to develop some educational resources for university students to teach them all about the therapy support workforce and how to work safely and effectively, how to delegate, and hopefully those resources are beginning to be rolled out into your university courses. So you might be having some sessions that I created, which is quite exciting. So that's my four place. Yeah, that's my four placements. I had to think about that for a moment. So as you can hear, Helena and I have both had slightly different types of placements, which is quite useful. But at the moment, I think it's right in saying that generally across the universities, we're moving away from our traditional core placements in MSK, respiratory and neuro. We're sort of shifting more towards an acute, non-acute and outpatients or community type thing. And Kay and Amalia, I don't know whether your universities badge the placements like that, or what you've been told that you to expect in terms of your placements going forwards.
So for me, I'm just about to go out on placement, and they've kept it they've actually kept it more MSK respiratory neuro based, although my first placement is going to be in women's health, which I'm very much looking forward to. But yeah, in terms of how they've kind of labeled what type of placements they've kept that we would expect to have, that's kind of how they've kept it for us. I don't know if Kay, maybe you've had something slightly different from your experience.
I'm afraid I haven't paid any attention, but I have. But I don't. I'm like worried there's going to be people on my course in here like they have told us, but no. I know at the beginning of the term they told us that we should expect, like, there are lots of variation these days. It's not like just respiratory MSK rotations, and so we've sort of been prepared for like a variety of placements. Ours is at Winchester. Our first placement's in June, so I haven't found out what I'm going to be doing yet.
I think that's probably the kind of almost the benefit of not benefit of COVID, but in terms of how the profession is moving forward. Like, we've been told that we could be in placements that are like kind of just research based, or like kind of similar to what you had, Laura, like leadership based. So it's non-patient facing placements, which, although maybe at first you may be like, oh, that's maybe not what I want, but it's also equally just an important area of physiotherapy that you may not think to explore if you weren't given the placement opportunity. So I think that's kind of a really exciting avenue that the profession is going alongside.
Absolutely. And I think from my personal experience with that placement, when I was first offered it, our university said, you know, we have been offered this placement by the CSP, does anybody want it, rather than sort of being allocated it. And I ummed and ahed, whether to go for it or not, because I was in kind of two minds. One, that I was like, well, my placements are a perfect opportunity to practice all those acute skills and things that, you know, you've been learning at uni. But actually it was my mum that persuaded me to take it, because she said, well, when else are you going to have the opportunity to practice those other sort of skills and learn about the profession at that sort of higher organizational level, and, you know, learn about what the CSP actually does, how to develop your leadership skills from this point, you know, the networking opportunities, all of that sort of thing. When else am I going to have a chance to do that and to see whether actually it's something that I enjoy at this point? Because there's always options later in your career to, you know, progress up the banding levels and become a manager. But how do you know you want to do that unless you've managed to experience it? So for me, it was a really good opportunity to have 6 weeks just to say, is this something I'm interested in? And actually I found that it is, and so that will be something I probably consider, you know, later on. I'm lucky that I work, or did work, as a therapy assistant, so I had some other opportunities to do some clinical things as well. But I have to say, if you're offered those sorts of placements, it's not a second-rate option. It's yeah, I loved it, and you gain so many other skills that, as I said, you don't get the opportunity to gain anywhere else, really. So yeah, I don't know, we'll have a look at the question and answer later, but it'd be interesting to see if anybody else has been offered the non-traditional sorts of placements, because they're definitely, as you said, Amalia, with COVID and everything, they're becoming more common, and they definitely should be. Helena, I don't know whether you've got any particular top tips that came out of your placements, or perhaps thinking about before you went on your first placement, what you were most kind of anxious about, and yeah, how you coped with that.
Top tip wise, always send an email to your supervisors before you start. It's courtesy. Two, makes a really good impression. You can ask the questions, ask how you're going to get there, where are you going to park, where are you going to get changed. Those sorts of things used to worry me, like, I'm going to turn up and be like, I'm not in my uniform, where am I going to? If you already know that, it's one less thing to worry about. Also ask whether they've got anything you want to cover before getting there, whether they've got any particular conditions that you might see regularly on your ward or within that department, just so you can brush up a little bit of knowledge before you go. I hate feeling a little bit stupid if I don't know. It's okay to not know, but I like just having, even if I'm just like, right, I'm going to be in respiratory, I'm probably going to see a lot of COPD patients, I'll just read up a little bit on COPD, or just knowing that that's probably the population you're going to see. For me, that was comforting. Other top tips, my little go-to of what I put in my bag, a little notepad, a pen, basic, but I have one with me at work now, and for me it's OBS. I can't remember OBS for my life, so I will write down, and patients are quite happy for you to do that. Get out a notepad and write down the SpO2, write down there whatever it is, pop it back in your pocket, carry on with the rest of your assessment, and then when you go back to write your notes, actually that bit you don't have to worry about remembering. Some of you are probably really good at that, but for me, that's how I manage. If there's something that I know I'm going to forget, pop it on the little notepad, and it just fits in the tunic pocket. If you're a guy, I'm sure that you're fine in your trouser pockets, and you don't like wearing tunics, but yeah, so definitely send the email, definitely go prepared. Other top tips, I'm not sure. In terms of my first placement, the reason why I was a little bit apprehensive about it was because I'd done band 3 work in community and I didn't actually enjoy it. So I was told I was going community, and I was like, oh no, I already know I don't like it, was almost my response. And I was like, no, it's a different role, it's a different place, it's a different organization, and I actually really enjoyed it. So I kind of like beat myself up a little bit afterwards for being like, why was I so presumptuous that I wasn't going to like it? I personally think a team really makes it. I had such a great team. They're really lovely, really like up for me joining in with like the nursing. I went on a nursing day and I've never seen so many leg dressings in my life. I worked with their band 3s and band 4s. And then with the OTs and the physios as well. So yeah, it was actually a really good placement. So don't try to go into a placement thinking you're not going to like it. I've also got I've heard other people say similar, that they just assumed that that area wasn't going to be for them. They weren't going to like neuro, they weren't going to like that, but actually once they got there, they were like, actually I'm really enjoying it, for a variety of reasons. But I think it's nice to go with an open view of, actually it's probably going to be a really positive experience. But yeah,
I completely agree with that, because I know that personally for my MSK outpatient placement, that was the one I was really worried about, just because I didn't really enjoy the MSK teaching at uni. It's not something I find particularly interesting, and so I was just a bit apprehensive about it. But like you just said, I tried to make the most out of the other opportunities that I had, such as doing the pregnant lady stuff, because actually women's health is something I'm interested in. So I tried my best to get as much of that into the placement as I could. But I think it's also, placement teaches you as much about what you do like as what you don't, and that's okay too. You know, after your 6 weeks or 8 weeks or however long the placement is, if you don't like that area, that's okay too. You don't have to come away thinking that was the best thing that you've ever done. As long as you come away thinking, I have learned something, then that placement, you know, as you know, has taught you something, and I think that's just as valuable. Yeah, you don't have to become the world's expert in your placement in however many weeks, particularly if you hear stories about your peers and things saying, oh gosh, I'm just loving it, I'm getting top marks, I'm, you know, excelling at everything. Not every placement has to be like that at all. So, and
every placement is so different. Like myself and Laura, we were in the same cohort, the same like uni experience, but our placements were so different. So yeah. Another thing that I've just remembered, that is, if you have to do projects at the end of your placement, which I did for each of mine, didn't realise this until kind of pretty close to the whole situation, but usually you get you have to do a project as part of your like criteria for your placement. So at the end you'll do a presentation, usually on either a patient what's the word a case study, patient case study, somebody potentially that you might have followed through that placement a bit more, or someone you found really interesting, or particular condition, and just don't worry about it, is all I'm going to say. Is actually they're quite useful to do. They're usually quite informal, and when you see that on your criteria, don't have a panic if presentations are not your thing. Honestly, they are so much better than you think it's going to be. Yeah, I just remember that.
No, definitely, because I think that was something that our university didn't necessarily tell us about until we got there. But no, they're very informal. They can be as formal or as formal as you want. If you really want to do it to the whole department and everything, why not? Go for it. But you definitely don't have to. I think another thing along those lines, like Helena said about keeping an open mind, is trying to shadow and see as many different other professions and places and things as you can whilst you're on each of your placement, to try and make the most of it. So, for example, in my major trauma placement, I spent some time in the emergency department. I sort of went around with the occupational therapists. I went into critical care. What else? I saw the head injury nurses. I was meant to go into surgery. Unfortunately, that didn't happen at the end.
I had the same actually.
Yeah.
I was so keen to go into surgery when I was on my amputee placement, and then it just happened. But do it.
Absolutely. Ask for all of those extra things.
I did do a clinic with some of the surgeons, which was as close as I got, and I helped sew someone's toe back together, which was really cool. Not for everyone, I appreciate, but I really enjoyed it. Okay. Obviously I didn't do I was just there. I wasn't actually doing, don't worry.
But actually that's a really important point, is that you have to remember that you are a student and you're not, you know, if somebody says, oh, can you go and do this injection or do this something else like that, that being aware of what your like competencies and what you can and can't do as a student, it's just something very important legally wise to just mention very briefly. Same with getting notes countersigned and things as well.
Yes.
any other top tips that we can think of off the top of our heads?
I would say if you've got any questions, like I was told this at the time, and it's just like, use being a student, like ask all your questions. For me, sometimes it's abbreviations. If you see an abbreviation, you're like, what on earth does that mean? Just ask, because usually it can just change a little bit whether it's usually for me it's conditions of a past medical history. Actually, that can make a big difference to what you can and can't do with somebody. They are always different, like some people use obscure abbreviations and things, but just ask away. Don't be afraid to get to know your MDT around you as well. They really encouraged that to me on my last placement when I was on the ward. They were like, go and ask the doctors. If you've got a question, go and ask them. If you're not sure if you can get somebody up because they've just had surgery, go and ask the surgeons. Like, it's okay. They're not gonna, if you're unsure about something, that is their area of expertise, and utilize that. You're a team. And they were always so up for it. So it's just very intimidating because they are also knowledgeable, and you feel like little old you, and actually it's really important you do work as a team. So just like, I still do that now. I always ask nurses and doctors about that. They know them pretty well, and if I haven't seen them before, I'm like, cool, ask away.
Absolutely. No, it's really, really important. And like we said right at the very start of the webinar, actually, MDT working, multidisciplinary teams are so important for patient care. So utilize everybody, definitely. I had something in my mind that's just gone out of my head. I've remembered. So at the moment, the placement, like grading forms and things, are changing, and the CST rolled out the Common Placement Assessment Form, or CPAF. So potentially some of you will be using that, or have already used that, depending on your universities. One thing that the CPAF raises is doing reflections and your SWOT analysis, your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and challenges, as well as it gives you a space to talk about any reasonable adjustments and things that the placement might need to make for you. If that's something that does apply to you, for whatever it might be, whether that's like a physical disability, dyslexia, all sorts, that's one thing that's really, really good and important to raise with your supervisor. Either in that initial email, like Helena said, before you go on your placement, if that's appropriate and you feel comfortable to do that. But just don't be afraid to ask for any support and things that you might need, because your placement team want to help you to get the most out of it, and if you don't tell them, then they don't know. So that's just something to bear in mind. Another thing that I've been asked recently is around reflections. I personally did one a week, and then if there was a particular event or something that happened, so for example, when I had my first patient fall on a ward, I wrote a reflection on that. So sort of, I guess, major events plus a weekly reflection. Your university, depending on the way and stuff that you're graded, might ask that to be slightly different. But I don't know what you all three of you think about reflections on placement, or whether universities have said anything about that.
For me, I know it's an unpopular opinion, but I actually quite like reflections. I'm not saying I like writing them, but actually, I am not very good at like processing something, particularly if it's an event, something like a fall. I'm like, what could I have done more? Like, could I have done something to prevent that from happening? And actually just like going back through it again and breaking it down a little bit, particularly I'm not letting it go and I'm letting it bug me. Actually, a reflection helps, and I kind of hate to admit it because everyone hates reflections just a little bit, but I find it helps. I'm a writer out when it comes to these sorts of things. But also a little thing for future you, when it comes to Band 5 interviews, you can then look back at your reflections and remember actually what experiences you have had, and they actually do ask you that. They're like, oh, have you ever had, like, what's the most challenging experience you've had on one of your placements, for example, was a question I was asked at my Band 5 interview. And actually, because I had gone back through my reflections and I was like, oh, this has happened, this, and some of them were a little less useful, don't get me wrong, it was more like, how did my first day go? But like future you will thank past you if you do that, just to remind yourself, actually, yeah, I have done that, I have had those experiences. So yeah.
Perfect.
I think so obviously I haven't been out on placement yet, but we in our first semester we had kind of a big assignment where we started to look at reflection, and although like at first I was like not really enjoying this, I think kind of as you said, like it was actually a very good like process to go through. Kind of we were just reflecting on a piece of group work that we did, and kind of it wasn't until I started to actually write it down and think about actually what we did and how I worked and how as a team worked, that you actually kind of realized where you could have gone, where you could have done a bit better, where you also did really well, or it just gives you a chance to kind of like reflect on your ability. And I mean, although I haven't done a physio placement yet on my course, a part of my undergrad I did a year-long placement with a rugby team in their physio department, and part of that we had a monthly catch up with my supervisor, and each time he'd be like, so let's reflect on this past month of like your performances and whatnot. And at first I was dreading it because I don't really like talking about myself or kind of any of those sort of experiences, but by the end like they became a lot more natural, and they actually really helped me kind of build upon, especially going kind of into my final year, and then it really helped me with my application and kind of I hope moving into this degree too.
Definitely, no, that's really interesting, and I think that's what you've just touched on there. Actually, reflections can be helpful not just within physio placements, but within life and the course itself. And actually, when you do become a registered physio at the end of the course, and you have to do real life CPD audits and stuff, actually reflections are one of the things that we actually have to do in order to stay practicing as a physiotherapist. So better to find out what works for you now and get into the habit now on your placements, rather than trying to figure it out later in life when you're stressing about all the things that come with being a band 5.
And I do think also, like, with not necessarily placement specific, but like reflections just in terms of like your university experience, even if it's like revision or like how you study, actually kind of thinking about what works best for you, because you can, like, I personally can quite easily get swept up with kind of going on with whatever everyone else is doing and then worrying that I'm not caught up with everyone, and kind of being in that bit of that vicious cycle of not feeling very good. But actually sometimes if you just spend, I don't know, just take a moment and be like, actually I work better doing it this way. I don't need to be I don't need to be staring at the screen for hours. I'm better at working in chunks, or actually I'm better at working in longer blocks. It's just quite a good way to just figure out a bit more about how you work as a person.
Absolutely. So I think the next thing that we wanted to touch briefly on is just some of those alternative placement experiences. So I know, Hals, you've already spoken about it a little bit, but would you be able to tell us a bit more about your FCP placement and what you were worried about with that?
Yeah, so when I got told that I was doing an FCP placement, I was like, what am I going to be doing? Because I've just done my MSK placement, and in my mind I was about to do the same thing again, and I was worried. Honestly, I was worried because I hadn't got any acute experience yet, and I was really worried about that. And I also didn't really know what FCP was. It's still kind of coming into play. It is out there, but people don't really know what it is. Some places more established than others. So I suppose my worry was I really didn't know what I was going in for, and also because I was the first student to do it, there was nobody to talk to about it in terms of what to expect. And also as a organization, because it wasn't it was a company, it was a strange setup. It was a company within within GP practices. They didn't usually take students because they felt it was a bit of a funny setup. So I did have a supervisor, obviously, but I ended up having about 5 supervisors because I worked with different people every single day. So for me, that was quite unsettling to begin with. What didn't help was I also got COVID at the beginning. So I had a shortened placement, and that just meant that I obviously didn't get as much time to get to know my supervisors, especially with it being, so I was literally with a different physio every day in a different GP practice. So it was all over the shop, essentially. It was very fast paced. It wasn't my favorite placement. I'm going to be really, really honest and put my hands up. but it is also a band 7 role, and that also worried me because I didn't know as a student where I fitted into how I was going to get experience, because I thought if it's a band 7 role, I can't really take on my own caseload because it's such a high level of working, like the speed of working. But obviously they adapted that to me being there. They're a very lovely team, but it was quite isolating because you are in a GP doctor surgery room all day, and a lot of it was phone calls because it was COVID at the time. There was some face-to-face as well. And some of them were longer appointments than the 10-minute initial ones, but it is fast paced. But what I learned from that though was that you do your subjective on the phone, but what you're getting at is your red flags. Like, rule out your red flags and you're kind of okay. Like, do your, what is it, when did it happen, what are your symptoms, get all those like the scary bits out of the way, and actually be quite surprised how much you can do in 10 minutes. But some people are chatty, and it's harder to get through an assessment. We've all had patients, well, I say we've all had patients, you will all have patients who are chatting for the world, and you have got 10 minutes, you've got 20 minutes, and you're so far through that time frame and you haven't really got very far with your assessment. But yeah, so it really honed in on those skills of the kind of importance of making sure that your patient was safe and that you had done your have they got saddle anesthesia, have they got, you know, your 5 NDPs, whatever they are. I'm not in MSK at the moment, can you tell? Yeah, so it just kind of highlighted a different skill set, even though it was very fast paced and a high level. And but I did see a lot of patients of loads of different backgrounds in terms of pathologies. And what was different was that they hadn't necessarily seen a doctor first or anything. They were literally straight through to us. But what also, because most of those were on telephone calls, I really had to set the scene to begin with and say, we've got 10 minutes just to discuss what's going on and we'll make a plan from there, just so that they knew actually that was the length of their assessment, because they weren't told that before. So that was quite important. So they had expectations of the session, and then we could go through from there. And then objective was hard on the phone. Because when you ask somebody to, can you bring your arms up in front of you, you have no idea whether they're doing this, like whether they're doing this, like actually that obviously to us makes a big difference, because those movements, what I did, some of them, like I did them on the phone and then we'd transfer over onto a video call and they were just doing something completely different. I was like, fine, we'll start again. You kind of end up with, like, I don't know if you had this, Laura, with like phone calls for objective stuff, but you end up having your own, like, instead of saying, can you raise your arms up in front of you or like to your side, you're like, can you be the angel of the north? And just like, I don't know, just make up anything that replicates those movements. And it sounds so stupid, but actually that's what you need to do at the time to work out what they were doing. But yeah, so it was a very quick, fast placement was my kind of overall feeling of it. Yeah, very heavy MSK, and actually I'm really glad I did my MSK placement before it, because it was just that much quicker. But yeah, red flags. I had some really good articles come out of that though, because they were also on it with their research stuff as well. They were really good at pointing me in the right direction to be on top of it with my reading as well. So so I don't feel like I structured my my description of that very well, but if anyone's got any questions on that one in particular, would you pop it on that the board, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions. But
perfect. No, that's brilliant. And I think it's just really important to highlight that there are alternative placements and things, like you were saying, you know, you're working at band 7 level as a student, and that can be really scary, but you know, if you don't know anybody else that's done it, yeah.
But it's nice to have spoken to people since you have done it. And it's a very mixed bag. As I said, it wasn't my favorite placement, but other people have said they loved it. And that goes to show, like, it's not, I really enjoyed my MSK placement, but that one for me was just too fast. I like to get to know people a bit more. And I know you can't always do that in MSK anyway, but like, it was just a very different environment, and you're lone working. So obviously I was like 1-to-1 with my supervisor lone working, so it wasn't as bad, but yeah.
Perfect. And I think the last thing that we were going to cover very quickly was about simulation type placements. So Kay, I know at Winchester simulation placements are a thing, and at Southampton they are a thing now too. Amalia, I don't know if Plymouth are doing any simulation stuff.
I'm not sure. I'm not aware of any placements in them. We've done simulation work, but I'm not sure. I'm not aware of any placements that are available yet, but
no,
might be.
That's fine. Kay, I don't know if you are able to tell people a little bit more about that, whether it's something that your uni have said that they'll be offering or not yet.
Yeah, so in our introduction week, we had 2 students come in to give a talk on their experience of the simulation placement, and the placement team basically said that this is something that Winchester are doing, and we might be put on simulation placement, and like has already been said, it's something that's happening more and more. So yeah, I would say there is a bit of apprehension, I think, for, even though the students, they did say that they had a really positive learning experience from it, I still think that there is perhaps a bit of a prejudice against it. In terms of, like, even my own feelings, like, oh, I hope I don't get a simulation, but then it's the unknown. It just seems you know, with those dolls for 6 weeks might be quite troubling, but I don't really know what it's all about, so that's what I would say.
No, that's brilliant, and I think that's really important. That I think for lots of people, actually, most of the anxiety that comes around placements is just the fear of the unknown, whatever situation, setting, department, specialty, whatever. And I think with simulation, there's kind of 2 main ways of doing it. One, like you just said, is with the mannequin dolls, which can be programmed to do all sorts of things in response to you, or you use them to practice suctioning and different, things as part of the placement. Or there's the other sort of side of it where you bring in actor role players to be the patient or be a fellow staff member that you've then got to practice your communication skills and interact with. Again, simulation is something that personally I'm really quite interested in. So my part-time job thing that I do is I work as an actor role player, delivering these sorts of placement experiences to students like Kay. And personally, I think they're brilliant. The reason I got into it in the first place is because I did one as a participant when I was working as a healthcare assistant. And I think the main thing is, if any of you are going to be having a simulation placement at any point, the main thing is just to have a go and to try and get the most out of it. You have to be the one that volunteers and steps up and actually has a go at the simulation. And it can be really scary doing it in front of peers, but actually the point and purpose of the simulations is that it's a nice, supportive, safe environment where everybody wants you to do well, and you can time out and ask your peers for support and say, oh gosh, I have no idea what I'm meant to do in this situation, can other people help me out? And that's the point of those simulation placements. It's group work together to problem solve whatever situation or thing that you're in that moment. And they, although you're not working with real life patients in that situation, you're developing all the communication skills and those other experiences that will then be really, really helpful, both on your next placements and also once you're then qualified as well. So that's just a little insight into that. So I'm quite conscious of time. So what I'd like to do now is to go and have a look at the Padlet site and to try and answer some of the questions that people have put up. So I'll put the link into the chat again. So if anybody's got any more questions, feel free to put them on the Padlet, write them in the chat, and then we shall answer them. So let me share my screen so that everybody can see this. Perfect. Okay, so what would be your one piece of advice for your first week? House, I don't know if you want to start with that.
What I said before, send that first email before you get there. Yeah. Get all that sorted in your head, for sure. Be prepared with other things. just kind of get stuck in. Don't be afraid to shadow people for the first couple of sessions, but if they ask you to, do you want to have a go? Like, absolutely go for it. It might, because I feel like the first assessment you might do, or the first like patient encounter, the first phone call you make to next of kin, it's always just a little bit scary, but once you've done it once, that's the first time. You're never going to have to do the first time again. So yeah, just get stuck in.
Perfect. And I think my answer to this is going to kind of touch on the second question there about how much is expected of you, how much is just observational. This will depend on the setting that you're in. As we've said, you know, there is a variety of different placement experiences, some of which you'll be able to jump straight into a bit more easily than others. But like Helena just said, actually for your first week, take the most of just asking lots and lots and lots of questions, find out about the service, the types of patients you'll be seeing, shadow as many different people as you can, whether that's physios or other members of the MDT that you're going to be working with over however long you're there. But just, yeah, throw yourself into it, ask all the questions you possibly can, write it all down in a little notebook, and just don't be afraid to get things wrong or to say the wrong thing, or you're not expected to know everything before you get there. The reason that you're on the placement is to learn, and so even if you're asked to do a bit of pre-reading and things, you don't need to know it all before you get there at all. So I think that's, yeah, both my bit of advice and how much is going to be expected of you. But yeah, in short, there should be no expectations. You set that with your supervisor in your first week, based on your own personal or previous experience, where you're at the moment, and yeah, the placement setting itself.
It will depend on what placement you're on as well. It'll be very different from your first placement to your fifth placement, just because I think the marking criteria changed for us. It probably still does, just in terms of like how much you're taking on, and like in terms of like caseload and things, but it's always changing. But as Laura said, it's very much down to you and your supervisor making those goals, so don't panic.
So is it best to email your placement to find out details, expected to turn out parking, what to wear? Generally, yes. So I know that when we were given our placement allocations, we were provided with the contact details for that placement, which was usually an email address, sometimes a phone number as well. So yeah, so send off your first email introducing yourself, who you are, what uni you're at, when you're coming on placement with them. And then hopefully they'll reply to you and welcome you into the team. And then, yeah, feel free to send a literal list of like the questions that you've listed there, and anything else that you can think of. Ask for
Some of them might sound really boring and basic, but as I said, it just kind of settled me in terms of knowing that little bit more, particularly with hospital parking, if it is a pickle. I know some people who did the journey to the hospital before they started their placement, because that's what settled them. That's what made them feel like they knew what they were doing. And I was like, what? But actually that was them. That's so everyone's going to have their own ways of like, what's the word? Getting ready for a placement. But I always sent emails, and plus it does, like, that first contact, even if you don't really have any questions like that, just introduce yourself, like Laura said, say whether you've got anything to cover. I know we all don't want extra work, but it's going to help you. And also, if you ask, it just looks keen, looks good, and then you turn up on the day and you're like, hey.
So somebody's written that they're about to start a research placement about developing student physio placements within nursing homes. Not sure if it's going to benefit them, as they're not getting any clinical hands-on experience, and should they wait and do a hands-on placement during the summer? So this is a really good question. I know that one of Helena and I's cohort had a placement within was it a care home or a nursing home? I can't remember. One of the two.
Oh.
Yeah. And it was the first placement that of its kind at our uni, and she was really, really anxious about it. And she didn't have a supervisor at the care home because she was the only physio member of staff going in, and yeah, she was quite anxious about it. I know that's not the question that's been asked though. But in terms of the developing clinical hands-on experience, as I said, like with my placement, which I didn't see any patients with the CSP, actually it sounds really counterintuitive, but some of the skills and things you do develop on the non-patient facing placements are just as important as seeing patients and getting the clinical skills. Not many people can say that they've helped to set up a new service like that, or develop new placement opportunities. And actually for me, when I was applying for my band 5 jobs, which I know for most of you will be a little bit further in the future, it was something that they said stood out about my application, that I'd had the opportunity to practice and develop those sorts of skills and be involved in those sorts of projects as a student. So that's something to bear in mind as well. But I'd say it is definitely worth doing, because you never know what you're going to learn from it, what opportunities and doors it might open, who you might meet, who you could network with. Obviously it'll be completely individual, but I'd say don't be put off by the fact that you're not seeing patients, because actually there's plenty of other skills and things that you can develop in that setting. I don't know if anybody else wants to add anything to that, but
yeah, I mean, I completely understand the worry. I think it is a very like the role we're going into is a very practical role in terms of what we do with patients, and we're people, like we like being with people, and it's when that's not necessarily the case. Actually, you are still learning, and you will get loads of experience in patient face-to-face contact on those hands-on skills. So don't think that you won't ever develop those skills. I had that worry. I think I mentioned earlier, different situation, but I hadn't been in an acute setting come my fourth placement, my last one, and that was a real worry for me. But actually, as I was reassured that I was going to be fine, and I'm fine. And like Laura said, just get all those opportunities in. It's a really good opportunity to explore a little bit in what's out there.
And if that person wants to message me to talk a bit more about that, then I'm more than happy to chat about that as well. So I'm starting my first placement, and it's in specialised medicine. Do we know what that might involve? I think the short answer is no, because it will depend on what hospital you're at and what specialty it is. So I'm afraid
is a huge bracket.
Yeah.
When people say medicine, the medicine team is ginormous. Hop over to that email, give a little email and ask, hey, look, what does, well, not hey, but but what does this particular specialty medicine department specialize in? What conditions can I expect to see? What areas can I brush up on? Is there any particular anatomy? Like things like that. For me, my vascular placement, the vascular anatomy side of things, that was really big. It might sound obvious, but obviously it's not quite as specific in this case. But yeah, just don't be afraid to ask them. You're not expected to know blindly what specialty that's going to be within.
Where did that question go? With teams under a lot of pressure at the moment, especially with COVID or staffing issues, are there any tips on how not to feel like a burden at times?
You're not a burden.
No, and you're never just the student either.
No. I know what you mean, because sometimes we all feel like a bit of a lemon, particularly when you're shadowing and cubicle space is small and you all want to get all the observation in, or the shadowing, or the hands-on skills as possible. Yes, COVID is still very real in terms of staffing pressures, because everyone is still going off sick. The NHS still have guidelines in where you do have to take time off work still if you are positive. They're ever changing, obviously, so there are pressures essentially, but don't feel like a burden. Nobody sees you as a burden either. Even if you feel like it, honestly, you are so part of the team. And I've never felt like a burden. I felt like a lemon, but it's a temporary lemon. And then, please don't feel like a burden. You're doing a great job.
I think also you're an extra pair of hands. Whoever you are, whatever you're able to help with, that's something that that team didn't have if you weren't there as well. So sometimes it's easier to think about it like that
Yeah.
you being there is, yes, you might be asking lots of questions and they might have to take time out to support you and do supervision and training and blah blah blah, blah. But actually you're a part of the service and you are helping to treat those patients or to do the clinical or non-clinical tasks and things.
And just
yeah.
Okay. I was just going to say, just ask if you've got like, if you feel like you're just kind of being a burden or whatever, just say like, is there anything I can do? Is there anyone that I can go and see? Or are they, you know, just preparing, like, is there any notes I can read up on for a patient that you're going to see today? Like, just like make use of your time. If you know, there are lots of, just ask and they can point you in the right direction. If things are really, really pressured for whatever reason, that's not because of you. Like, it's, you know, you're there to learn as well, and they 100% know that. We all know that. So yeah,
you are the future of the workforce, so they need to put their time and energy into investing into you. Okay, last question. Have any of you had international colleagues taking placements? And if so, have you had the chance to chat about the experiences and how they're handling the transition? Coming from the US, I'm nervous about what to expect transition-wise into a new country and a different style of education. Another very good question.
Good question.
No, I think is my short answer.
I know that it is different, and particularly, well, from a lot of countries coming aboard, education is different and the healthcare system is different, particularly from the US, and obviously a variety of other countries. So I mean, I can't directly relate to the question, particularly in terms of undertaking placements. But I know staff who transition from once they are a physio or therapy technicians actually, who have trained abroad, and then they've come to the UK to work here as well. And it is a transition, I think, because of this, how the way the healthcare system works, and actually what like pathways are available and treatments that are available under the NHS. So just kind of I don't know if I'm answering this question particularly well, probably not, and I apologize. But yeah, just kind of get familiar with those pathways and what services are available within, if you're treating somebody and you're trying to point them in a particular direction for particular care or therapy services or befriending services. Actually just know what the NHS can offer, whether it's equipment as well, because everywhere is different, and just knowing what you can provide for a patient, I suppose. But for placements, it's probably not particularly helpful.
I was just going to quickly say I have a girl actually on my course who's from Zimbabwe. So she's coming over, and I think it's like the healthcare system over here is very different to what she's used to. I think in general the role of like a physiotherapist isn't as prominent over there as is here, so that's been quite an adjustment for her. But I think kind of just seeing how she's like coped with it all, she's just been very good at, obviously it's kind of easier to say kind of reach out, but she's been very good at reaching out to all of us, not necessarily just our lecturers, but kind of, yeah, like just speaking to all of us, even if it's just like the smallest thing that she kind of just needs a bit of clarity on, because for us we take for granted because it's, you know, it's what we live in and what we've been brought up with. But for her, obviously it was something that's very different. So I think just don't be afraid just to ask questions. Like no question is a stupid question. No question, like just don't be afraid just to say, oh, I need a bit more clarity on this, or I'm a bit stuck. Like no one's gonna shoot you down, or, you know, no one's gonna say, oh, I'm not gonna answer that for you. So I think, yeah, just reach out if you ever need help. But I think, you know, from my experience, you should be very, well, not my experience, from my experience of my friend, you should be pretty well supported by like your peers and as well as like academic staff members.
Peers are super important. With just, I mean, I lived with half of the course and Laura lived with the other half. So yeah, and again, I know that's not directly your question, but it is so important, as Amalia was saying, just, yeah, ask away, ask questions.
And also just letting your supervisor know that that you might need a little bit of extra help before you get onto the placement, or talking through your worries and concerns about that them as well. It's good to be transparent and open, and then they can help try and support you in whatever way, shape or form that they can. Perfect. Okay, so I'm just gonna move this and double check. Lovely. Right, let me stop sharing. Oh no, I've got this one to do. So this is a QR code, which you can all now scan to A, do the feedback form, and then B, it will give you access to the CPD certificate that you can then file away in your CPD folder. If you haven't already started a CPD folder or continuing professional development, I definitely recommend doing that now at this point of your careers, as it's somewhere just to keep a track of all the things like this that you're attending, so that when you get round to becoming a registered physio and you have to prove that you're doing things to enhance your professional development, that you can improve it. So I'll leave that up for a few more minutes, and I'm just going to say thank you to Helena, Amalia and Kay for chatting with us this evening. It's been really, really useful, and I hope everybody watching has found it useful as well. As we said, this has been recorded, so if you really want to, you can watch it again. I'll pop it up on the YouTube later, and I'm sure I'll reiterate it, but thank you very much everybody else for joining me, and if anybody's got any more questions at any point, feel free to direct message one of us on Instagram or message the Future Frontline page, and that will get back to us and we'll be able to help you out. Then as a very final thing, so Future Frontline we're a free organisation, as I said, aiming to help spread the good word of all of the different NHS careers, but we are solely reliant on donations. So if you would like to, there's no pressure, but there's a QR code there that you could scan to donate us a coffee to help fund things like our Zoom channel. And I'm going to go back to the previous one just in case you didn't have time for that. The very last thing I just want to mention is, if you don't already know, we've got our MDT webinar, so our multidisciplinary team webinar this Sunday at, I think it's at 4 o'clock. And yeah, perfect, there you go. And it's on all things hip fractures, which obviously for physios is super, super important that we're involved in a patient journey through a hip fracture. So that will be recorded as well, but if you want to come and join us for that, the link's in the Future Frontline Instagram bio. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
I signed up for that one today, so
There we go.
I realised I disappeared into darkness so quickly.
I seem to have got brighter and brighter.
You have, like, not even that far away, like you're in a different, I should probably turn the light on, but it's so far away. Are we hanging about in case anyone's got any other questions? Or
yeah, I'm just going to stop the recording now, so thank you very much everybody.